Oh my God, no. This is not possible. How can my best friend and my boyfriend betray me like this?
She stared at the elegant calligraphy, the gold embossing, the two names that made her stomach turn. Ethan Blake and Maya Reynolds. Her boyfriend and her best friend. Getting married in 3 weeks. The room spun. Leah gripped the edge of her kitchen counter, her knuckles white, her breathing shallow. This couldn't be real. She'd just seen Ethan 2 days ago. He'd kissed her goodbye, told her he loved her, promised they'd grab dinner that weekend. And Maya had called her just yesterday, laughing about some ridiculous thing that happened at work, acting like everything was normal. But here it was, proof in elegant script that nothing had been normal for a very long time. The invitation had been sent to her old address, forwarded by her landlord. They hadn't even planned to tell her. They were just going to let her find out, or maybe they hoped she never would. Leah picked up her phone with shaking hands and pulled up Ethan's number. Her finger hovered over the call button. What would she even say? What could possibly explain this? Before she could decide, her phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Hey babe, can we talk? There's something I need to tell you." The casual tone, the pet name, the audacity of it all made something snap inside Leah. She grabbed her keys and walked out the door, the invitation still lying on her floor like evidence of a crime. If this story already has you hooked, hit that like button now because this journey is just beginning, and make sure you're subscribed because you won't want to miss how this unfolds. 20 minutes later, Leah stood outside Maya's apartment, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She didn't knock. She used the spare key Maya had given her years ago, back when they were real friends, back when trust meant something. Maya was in the kitchen, her back to the door, humming while she arranged flowers in a vase. Wedding flowers, Leah realized with a jolt. White roses and baby's breath. How long? Leah's voice cut through the apartment like a blade. Maya spun around, the color draining from her face. Leah, I can explain. How long have you been sleeping with my boyfriend? Leah's voice was eerily calm, which somehow made the question more terrifying. Maya's mouth opened and closed. She set down the vase carefully, her hands shaking. It's not what you think. Then what is it, Maya? Because I'm holding a wedding invitation with your name and Ethan's on it, I'm trying really hard to figure out what else it could be. Tears welled up in Maya's eyes, but Leah felt nothing. No sympathy, no sadness, just a cold, hollow rage that had settled in her chest. It started as a game, Maya whispered. Those 5 words made Leah's blood run cold. What did you just say? Maya sank into a chair, her perfect composure crumbling. 6 months ago, at Kyle's party, the guys were drunk, making stupid bets. Kyle dared Ethan to make you fall in love with him. It was supposed to be harmless, just a stupid challenge. The room tilted. Leah grabbed the back of the couch to steady herself. You're telling me that everything, every moment, every word, was a lie? No, Maya said quickly. That's not Leah. He really did fall for you. That's why I got involved. You got involved? What does that even mean? Maya stood up, tears streaming down her face now. I've been in love with Ethan since college. When he started the bet, I thought if I helped him, if I coached him on what to say, how to act, he'd see me differently. But instead, he actually fell for you. He was going to call off the bet, tell you everything, choose you. Leah felt like she was drowning. So you told me first. I panicked. Maya sobbed. I couldn't lose him to you. I couldn't watch him choose you over me after years of wanting him. So I twisted the story. I made it seem like he never cared. like it was all still just a game. And Ethan? He just went along with this? He tried to explain, but you blocked him. You wouldn't take his calls. And I was there, telling him I understood, that I'd help him through it. One thing led to another and now you're marrying him. Leah finished, her voice hollow. Congratulations, Maya. You won. Leah, please. But Leah was already walking toward the door. She paused with her hand on the knob, looking back at the woman who had been her best friend for 8 years. I hope you're happy together, Leah said quietly. I hope every time he looks at you, he doesn't see the woman who manipulated him into this. I hope every time you look at him, you don't remember that he wanted me first. She left before Maya could respond, before the tears she'd been holding back could fall, before the crushing weight of betrayal could bring her to her knees. The next 3 months passed in a blur of pain. Leah quit her job at the gallery where she'd met Ethan, stopped posting on social media, and avoided every place they used to go together. She moved to a tiny studio apartment across the city and spent her days staring at blank canvases, unable to paint, unable to create, unable to feel anything but the numbing ache of loss. Her phone buzzed constantly at first. Ethan calling, texting, leaving voicemails that she deleted without listening to. Maya sending long, rambling messages about how sorry she was, how it wasn't supposed to happen this way. Leah blocked them both and tried to pretend they had never existed. But late at night, alone in her apartment, she couldn't stop the memories. The way Ethan had looked at her the first time they met, like she was the most fascinating person in the room. The sound of his laugh when she made a terrible joke. The feeling of his hand in hers as they walked through the park. Had any of it been real? Or had she been so desperate to be loved that she'd imagined the connection? One morning, Leah woke up and realized she couldn't remember what day it was. She'd been existing, not living, moving through the motions without purpose or direction. She looked around her apartment, at the blank canvases collecting dust, at the person she'd become, small and broken and defeated. That's when she decided to leave. Leah packed everything she owned into her car and drove north until she ran out of highway. She ended up in a small coastal town she'd never heard of, with weathered buildings and the smell of salt in the air. She rented a room above a bakery for next to nothing and started walking the beach every morning, watching the waves crash against the shore with relentless, rhythmic certainty. One afternoon, she wandered into a tiny art supply store tucked between a bookshop and a cafe. The owner, an elderly woman named Grace with paint-stained fingers and kind eyes, looked up from the watercolor she was working on. "You have the look of someone who's lost something," Grace said without preamble. Leah managed a weak smile. "Is it that obvious?" "I've been painting for 60 years, dear. I've learned to see what people don't say." Grace set down her brush. "What did you lose? Love? Purpose? Yourself?" "All three, I think." Grace nodded like she understood completely. "Then you've come to the right place. Loss is just another word for empty space, and empty space is where art begins." That afternoon, Leah bought a small canvas, basic paints, and a set of brushes. She carried them back to her room and set them up by the window overlooking the ocean. For an hour, she just stared at the blank white surface, paralyzed by the fear that she'd forgotten how to create. Then she picked up a brush, dipped it in black paint, and made a single stroke across the canvas. It was messy, uncertain, imperfect. It was exactly what she needed. The painting that emerged over the next week was unlike anything Leah had created before. It wasn't pretty or polished. It was raw, angry, honest. Dark colors swirled with violent energy, punctuated by slashes of red that looked like wounds. She called it the game, and felt something loosen in her chest when she finished. Grace saw it when Leah brought it to the shop to buy more supplies. The older woman studied it for a long moment, then looked at Leah with new respect. "This is pain made visible," Grace said softly. "This is the work of someone who's been broken and is brave enough to show it." "It's all I know how to paint right now," Leah admitted. "Then paint it. Paint every bit of the pain until there's nothing left. That's how you heal, dear. You bleed it out on canvas until you're empty enough to fill yourself back up with something better." Over the next 18 months, Leah painted like her life depended on it. She worked in the bakery during the day, kneading dough and serving coffee, and painted every night until her hands cramped and her eyes blurred. Each canvas was a confession, a scream, a prayer. She painted betrayal and loneliness and rage. She painted the ghost of a love that never existed and the death of a friendship built on lies. Grace became her mentor, teaching her techniques and encouraging her to push deeper, to be braver, to stop hiding behind pretty colors and safe compositions. Under Grace's guidance, Leah's work evolved from simple emotional purging into something profound and powerful. One day, a gallery owner from the city visited the coastal town and wandered into Grace's shop. He saw Leah's paintings displayed in the window and stopped in his tracks. "Who painted these?" he demanded. Leah, who was in the back room mixing paints, emerged hesitantly. "I did." The gallery owner, a sharp-dressed man named Marcus Chen, studied her with intense interest. "These are extraordinary, raw, honest, technically brilliant. How long have you been working in this style?" "About a year and a half. Do you have more?" Leah had 17 canvases in her small apartment, each one a chapter of her healing process. She showed them to Marcus, watching nervously as he examined each piece with professional scrutiny. "I want to feature you," he said finally. "My gallery in New York. I'm curating a show on contemporary emotional realism. Your work would be the centerpiece." Leah's heart stuttered. "New York?" "Unless you're opposed to launching your career in one of the art capitals of the world," Marcus said with a slight smile. 6 weeks later, Leah stood in a gleaming Manhattan gallery, surrounded by her own paintings hanging on pristine white walls. The exhibition was called The Anatomy of a Lie, and every piece told part of her story without revealing the details. Critics praised her unflinching emotional honesty and masterful use of color to convey psychological complexity. The opening night was packed with art collectors, journalists, and curious viewers. Leah wore a simple black dress and moved through the crowd in a daze, still unable to believe this was her life now. People wanted to buy her work, to commission pieces, to know her story. She was standing in front of her largest painting, a massive canvas titled The Hidden Bet, when she felt someone's presence behind her. The hair on the back of her neck stood up before she even turned around. Ethan stood there in an expensive suit, looking older and tired in a way that went beyond physical appearance. His eyes found hers, and for a moment, neither of them moved. "What are you doing here?" Leah's voice came out calmer than she felt. "I saw the article in the Times," Ethan said quietly, "about the artist who turned heartbreak into her medium. I knew it was you." "You should leave." "I know, I will. But first, please, just give me 5 minutes to tell you the truth." Leah looked around the gallery at the life she'd built from the ashes of what he'd destroyed. "You had your chance to tell me the truth 2 years ago. You chose to let Maya speak for you instead." "Because I was a coward," Ethan said, his voice breaking slightly. Because I didn't know how to explain that I'd started our relationship as a stupid bet, but ended up falling so completely in love with you that it terrified me. Don't, Leah warned. Kyle dared me to make you fall for me. It was supposed to be harmless, just guy talk and bravado. But from the first real conversation we had, about your art, about your dreams, I knew I was in trouble. You weren't like anyone I'd ever met. You saw the world differently. You made me want to be better. Leah's eyes stung with tears she refused to let fall. And Maya? Maya knew about the bet from the beginning. She was in love with me, had been for years, and I was too self-absorbed to notice. When she realized I was actually falling for you, she panicked. That's not what I want to hear. I know. She lied to both of us. She told you I never loved you, that it was all still a game. She told me you knew everything and wanted nothing to do with me. When I tried to reach you, to explain, you'd already blocked me everywhere. And Maya was there, crying, apologizing, saying she'd help me fix it. I was grieving you, and she was convenient. I convinced myself that if I couldn't have you, it didn't matter who I was with. Leah's hands clenched into fists at her sides. So you decided to marry her? I decided to marry her because I was angry at myself, because I thought I'd lost you forever, because I was too much of a coward to fight for what I really wanted. The marriage lasted 8 months before she left. She left you? Ethan laughed bitterly. She said she couldn't compete with a ghost. Every time I looked at her, I saw you. Every time we fought, I wished it was you I was fighting with instead. She said loving someone who's in love with someone else was the loneliest feeling in the world. She was right. Leah turned away from him, looking at her painting. The figure in it was faceless, drowning in dark colors, reaching toward a light that remained forever out of reach. I don't know why you're telling me this, she said. Because you deserve to know the truth. Because I've spent 2 years hating myself for hurting the only person who ever made me want to be genuine. Because I love you, Leah. I loved you then. I love you now. And I'll probably love you for the rest of my life, even if you never speak to me again after tonight. Leah finally turned to face him, and Ethan saw the woman she'd become. Stronger, harder, more beautiful in her pain than she'd been in her innocence. You want to know what's funny? Leah said softly. For months, I waited for this moment. I imagined you coming back, explaining everything, begging for forgiveness. I imagined myself either falling into your arms or destroying you with my rejection. But now that you're here, I don't feel anything. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. I'm not angry anymore, Leah continued. I'm not sad. I'm not anything. You're just a stranger who used to know me, telling a story about people who don't exist anymore. The Leah who loved you is gone. I painted her out of existence, one canvas at a time. I understand, Ethan said, though his voice cracked on the words. I hope you find peace, Ethan. I hope you figure out who you are without games or bets or lies. I hope you learn that love isn't something you win or lose. It's something you build with honesty. Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. Before I go, I want you to have this. You don't have to open it now or ever. But it's yours. He placed it in her hand and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of strangers admiring her work. Leah stood there for a long moment, the envelope warm against her palm. Part of her wanted to throw it away without looking, but a larger part, the part that had learned to face pain instead of running from it, needed to know. She opened it carefully. Inside was a photograph of a painting she'd started 2 years ago, before everything fell apart. It was a portrait of Ethan, unfinished, abandoned when her world collapsed. The face was half complete, caught between realism and abstraction, as if the subject was dissolving before her eyes. There was a note in Ethan's handwriting. "I bought this from your old studio before they cleared it out. I couldn't let it be thrown away. Maybe someday you'll want to finish it. Maybe you'll want to destroy it. Either way, it belongs to you." Leah stared at the photograph for a long time, this ghost of her past work, this reminder of who she used to be. That night, after the gallery closed and the crowds dispersed, Leah sat alone among her paintings and cried for the first time in months. Not from sadness exactly, but from the overwhelming weight of everything she'd survived. She cried for the girl who'd believed in fairy tales, for the friend who'd chosen jealousy over loyalty, for the man who'd confused manipulation with love. And then, when the tears finally stopped, she felt lighter, emptier in a good way, like Grace had promised. Empty enough to fill herself with something new. 3 months later, Leah returned to the coastal town. She'd sold 6 paintings from her exhibition and had commissions lined up for the next year. But more importantly, she'd made a decision. She set up an easel in her small apartment overlooking the ocean and carefully positioned the unfinished painting of Ethan. For 3 days, she studied it, remembering who she'd been when she painted it, understanding finally what it represented. Then she picked up her brush and began to work. But instead of completing Ethan's face, she painted over it. Layer by layer, she transformed him into a shadow, a suggestion of a person rather than a definite presence. And behind where he had been, she painted herself. Not as she was when she started the painting, but as she was now, strong, certain, whole. When she finished, the painting no longer belonged to her past. It was a declaration of her present. She titled it The Hidden Bet and added it to her collection. The painting was featured in her second exhibition 9 months later. This show was smaller, more intimate, held in Grace's coastal town gallery. The theme was Reconstruction Art After Heartbreak. On opening night, Leah stood among people who knew nothing of her story, but everything about her art. They saw strength in her brushstrokes, wisdom in her color choices, hope in her compositions. Grace stood beside her, beaming with pride. "You've come a long way from that first angry canvas," she said. Leah smiled. "I had a good teacher." "You had courage. That's rarer and more valuable." As the evening wound down, Leah noticed a figure standing in front of the hidden bet. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought it might be Ethan again. But as the person turned, she saw it was just a stranger, someone moved by her work, someone who saw their own story reflected in her pain. That's when Leah realized she'd truly let go. Ethan could show up or not show up, and it wouldn't matter. He was no longer the center of her story. He was barely a footnote. She'd spent 2 years transforming her heartbreak into art, her betrayal into beauty, her victimhood into victory. And in doing so, she'd discovered something more valuable than the love she'd lost. She'd discovered herself. The woman who emerged from that pain was someone Leah actually admired. Someone strong enough to forgive, but wise enough not to forget. Someone who could take the worst thing that ever happened to her and turn it into the catalyst for her greatest success. 6 months later, Leah received a letter. It was from Maya, written from a treatment center where she was addressing her mental health and her pattern of destructive behavior. The letter was long, honest, and painful to read. Maya took full responsibility for her manipulations, her lies, her betrayal. She didn't ask for forgiveness, just wanted Leah to know the truth. Leah read it twice, then carefully filed it away. She felt sympathy for Maya, even a strange sort of compassion, but no desire to reconnect. Some bridges, once burned, were meant to stay ashes. A year after her second exhibition, Leah was featured in a major art magazine. The article was titled, "From Heartbreak to Healing: How One Artist Turned Pain into Power." It detailed her journey without revealing the specific details of her betrayal, focusing instead on the universal themes of loss and reconstruction. The article went viral. Suddenly, Leah was receiving messages from people around the world, sharing their own stories of betrayal and survival. She realized her art had transcended her personal experience and become something bigger, something that helped others feel less alone in their pain. She started a blog, writing about the intersection of art and healing, sharing her process and encouraging others to find creative outlets for their trauma. The blog grew into a book deal, then speaking engagements, then workshops for artists dealing with personal tragedy. Through it all, Leah kept painting. Each canvas was a conversation with herself, a meditation on growth, a celebration of resilience. 3 years after the wedding invitation that shattered her world, Leah returned to the city where it all began. She'd been invited to speak, sharing her story of turning betrayal into artistic success. Standing on stage in front of 500 people, Leah felt a surreal sense of completion. This was the same city where she'd been humiliated, where she'd lost everything, where she'd fled in pieces. Now she was returning whole, successful, confident in who she'd become. "He made me fall for him, then married my best friend," Leah said to the silent audience. "For a long time, I thought that was the end of my story. The ultimate betrayal, the final proof that I wasn't enough, wasn't worthy, wasn't lovable." She paused, letting the words settle. But it wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The beginning of me learning that my worth isn't determined by who chooses me. The beginning of me discovering that I could survive without the people I thought I needed. The beginning of me creating a life so beautiful that losing them became the best thing that ever happened to me. The audience erupted in applause. Leah saw women crying, nodding, recognizing their own pain in her words. After the conference, as Leah walked through the city streets toward her hotel, she passed the gallery where she'd first met Ethan. It was under new management now, featuring different artists, serving different wine. She stood outside for a moment, remembering the girl she'd been, so eager to be loved that she'd missed all the warning signs. She felt grateful to that girl for surviving, and grateful to herself for becoming someone that girl would be proud of. As Leah continued walking, her phone buzzed with a message from Grace. "Saw your speech online, you magnificent creature. You've turned your pain into power and your wounds into wings. I'm so proud of who you've become." Leah smiled and typed back, "I learned from the best." That night, in her hotel room, Leah pulled out her sketchbook and began drawing. Not a plan for a new painting, but simply lines and shapes that flowed from her unconscious mind. The drawings were lighter than her previous work, touched with hope and possibility. She was ready, she realized, to paint something new. Something that wasn't about what she'd lost, but about what she'd found. Something that celebrated the woman she'd become, rather than mourning the woman she'd been. The next morning, Leah caught an early train back to the coastal town. As the landscape blurred past her window, she thought about the journey she'd taken. From the maid-like devotion she'd shown Ethan, always trying to be enough for him, to the queen she'd become in her own kingdom of creation. She thought about forgiveness, not the kind that required reconciliation, but the kind that freed you from carrying someone else's mistakes in your heart. She'd forgiven Ethan and Maya, not because they deserved it, but because she deserved peace. When Leah finally returned to her studio, she set up a massive new canvas, the biggest she'd ever worked with. For days, she simply stared at it, feeling out what wanted to be born. Then, one morning, she began. The painting that emerged was unlike anything she'd created before. It was bright, bold, celebratory. It showed a woman walking away from shadows toward light, her arms open, her face tilted toward the sun. The woman was clearly Leah, but she was also every woman who'd ever been betrayed and chosen to rise anyway. She titled it, After the Game, and knew, even before it was finished, that this was her masterpiece. Not because it was technically perfect, but because it represented the completion of her transformation. The painting was featured on the cover of her book, The Art of Reconstruction, which became a bestseller in the self-help and art categories. In interviews, people always asked Leah if she'd ever spoken to Ethan again. No, she'd answer honestly. And I don't need to. His role in my story is over. He was the catalyst, not the conclusion. Do you hate him? I don't feel strongly enough about him to hate him. He's just a person I used to know, who taught me an important lesson about trusting my instincts and valuing myself. If he asked for another chance, would you give it to him? Leah would smile at this question, the same knowing smile that appeared in her self-portrait. The woman he fell in love with doesn't exist anymore. And the woman I've become would never settle for someone who started our relationship with a lie. So no, there's no going back. Only forward. 5 years after the wedding invitation, Leah opened her own gallery in the coastal town. It featured her work alongside emerging artists with a special focus on art as therapy and healing. She established a foundation that provided free art supplies and classes to people recovering from trauma. Grace, now in her late 70s, was there for the grand opening, beaming with pride as Leah cut the ribbon. You did it, Grace whispered. You took the worst thing that ever happened to you and built something beautiful from the wreckage. Leah hugged her mentor tightly. We did it. You showed me how. That night, as Leah locked up her gallery and walked along the beach, she thought about the girl who'd stood outside a church, clutching a wedding invitation, wondering how her life had gone so wrong. She wished she could go back and tell that girl that the pain was temporary, but the strength she'd gain would be permanent. She wished she could tell her that losing Ethan and Maya wasn't losing anything real. It was shedding dead weight she'd been carrying. That the love she'd thought she needed from them was nothing compared to the love she'd learned to give herself. The moon hung low over the ocean, painting a silver path across the dark water. Leah stood at the edge of the surf, feeling the cold water lap at her bare feet, and thought about how far she'd traveled. He'd made her fall for him, then married her best friend. But in doing so, he'd given her the greatest gift she could have received: freedom. Freedom from needing external validation. Freedom from settling for love that required her to be small. Freedom to become exactly who she was meant to be. If you made it this far, drop a comment below and tell me about a time someone's betrayal actually led to your biggest breakthrough. And don't forget to subscribe, because we're just getting started with stories of transformation, resilience, and rising from the ashes stronger than before. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.